When we're gone from this earth, what will we leave behind? What will we pass down to those who come after us? Plastic. If nothing else, lots of plastic. A plastic bag might take 20 years to break down, but harder, thicker plastics like toothbrushes might take 500 years or more to break down. Elizabeth Bradfield is a poet and naturalist who sees firsthand, in her work as a marine educator, the ravaging impacts of plastic on marine life. But she also confronts plastic and our collective addiction to it as a subject of poetry. Her poem, Plastic, A Personal History, is what she calls a cranky naturalist poem, which is pretty funny. But embedded in the humor are big questions. How has plastic become part of who we are as individuals and as a species? Now that we know the dangers and devastating effects of plastic production and disposal, how must we change our relationship to this petrochemical product? What kind of world are we making, and what alternatives do we have? I'm John Fiege, and this episode of Chrysalis is part of the Chrysalis Poets series. Elizabeth Bradfield is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including, most recently, Toward Antarctica. She co-edited the newly released anthology, Cascadia Field Guide, Art, Ecology, Poetry. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, Poetry, The Sun, and Orion, and her honors include the Audre Lorde Prize and a Stegner Fellowship. She teaches creative writing at Brandeis University and is founder and editor-in-chief of Broadsided Press. She lives on Cape Cod, where she also works as a naturalist and marine educator. Here is Elizabeth Bradfield reading her poem, Plastic, A Personal History.
Plastic, A Personal History. How can I find a way to praise it? Do the early inventors and embracers churn with regret? I don't think my parents, born in the swing toward ubiquity, chew and chew and chew on plastic. But of course they do. Bits in water, food flesh, air. And their parents? I remember Dad mocking his mother's drawer of saved rubber bands and his father-in-law's red, corroded jerry can, patched and patched, never replaced for new, for never rusting. Cash or plastic? Plastic, even for gum. We hate the $5 minimum. Bills paperless, automatic, almost unreal. My toys were plastic, castle and circus train and yo-yo. Did my lunches ever get wrapped in waxed paper, or was it all saran, saran, saran? Sarah's mom was given, in Girl Scouts, a blue sheet of plastic to cut, sew, and trim with white piping into pouches for camping. Sarah has it still, brittle but useful. Merit badge for waterproofing, for everlasting. You, too, must have heard stories, now quaint as carriages, of first plastic, pre-plastic, eras of glass, waxed cloth, and tin, of shared syringes. All our grocery bags growing up were paper, bottom hefted on forearm, top crunched to grab. We used them to line the kitchen garbage pail. Not that long ago, maybe a decade, I made purses for my sisters out of putty-colored, red-lettered plastic Safeway bags. I'd snag a stack each time I went, then fold and sew, quilt with bright thread, line with thrift store blouses. They were sturdy and beautiful, rainproof and light. Clever, so clever. I regret them. And the plastic toothpicks, folders, shoes that seemed so cheap, so easy, so use again, and thus less wasteful then. What did we do before to-go lids? Things must have just spilled and spilled. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what pearl forms around a grain of plastic in an oyster? Is it as beautiful? Would you wear it? Would you buy it for your daughter so she in turn could pass it down and pass it down and pass it down?
Thank you. That's so beautiful, and there's so much going on there in this poem.
It's funny. This poem started kind of just, as a bitter rant.
Well, it didn't end there.
No, it didn't end there.
So tell me about that. What's the bitter rant?
Oh, just plastic, Honestly, the poem started when my friend Sarah, she's my age, I'm 50, 51, and she showed me this little bag her mom made. And I started thinking, wow, imagine being the generation that discovered plastic, right? Wow, plastic's so handy. Tupperware parties, all that stuff, right? And I mean, to be the generation that saw plastic come into use, I was just really thinking about that shift, and that's where the poem started.
So I want to just dive into to probably my favorite moment in the poem. So I'm gonna reread this one stanza. You too must have heard stories, now quaint as carriages, of first plastic, pre-plastic, eras of glass, waxed cloth, and tin, of shared syringes. So that line of shared syringes hit me really
Mhm.
hard.
Mhm.
Prior to this, you mentioned rubber bands and credit cards and yo-yos and saran wrap and Girl Scout pouches, all these kind of quaint objects of the past. But shared syringes is like this
Mhm.
bomb you drop in the poem.
Mhm.
Toys and everyday items, the toils and frivolities of childhood all of a sudden become the life-threatening addictions of the teenage years and young adulthood. A
Mm.
plastic addiction that may seem at first to make our lives better while it slowly kills us.
Hmm.
Can you talk about this moment in the poem? Like, where did this come from? Maybe what's going on structurally here that gives this moment in the poem so much weight?
Well, I think a couple of things. I did just want to imagine and put forth the ground truthing that we did have a world before plastic, right? What did
Mhm.
we do? There were these things. And then I was thinking, all right, let's think about the advantages of plastic, right? Of disposable syringes, of, the problems of disease being swapped. The doctor comes to your house, or what, you're a morphine addict or whatever, in the Sherlock Holmesian kind of way with his glass syringe.
Mhm.
Um, but of course, you didn't throw any of that away, right? And so there is a benefit to plastic, right? There's a danger um, in this older world as well as the danger in this present world, and so I wanted that pivot and that shift. I didn't want this poem to be. I mean, gosh, I think about what my life would have been like as a queer woman in the era of wax cloth and tin. Wouldn't have been so happy.
Yeah.
So I was thinking of just the darker shadow of that nostalgia, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting to start with nostalgia. And then, I mean, this is the poetry of it. It's that single turn of phrase changes the color and the tone of everything so quickly.
Yeah, and I really, I think, how you write a poem, and um, for me, when I write a poem, it's a journey, right? It's an act of discovery, and
Right.
a lot of the discovery for me in this poem was through sound, as well as through images. And for me, that rhyme of tin and syringes um, was a discovery, a linkage, and I think
Mm,
same as earlier in the poem, plastic, even for gum, we hate the $5 minimum, and that gum minimum rhyme.
mm,
These kind of
right.
resonances,
Yeah.
they tickle me. You know what I mean? So there's like the darkness and also the humor for me, and also the delight of sound and all of these things swirling around.
Right. Right. Well, the other thing, I got cancer 10 years ago and
Mm.
it almost died.
Oh, I'm so
And I
sorry.
Oh, yeah, it was horrendous, but I'm here. But
Good.
you you know, I spent 2 years in treatment, and the number of disposable plastic objects that were discarded
Yeah.
in front of me to care just
Yeah.
for me just blew my mind away, and
Yeah.
at the same time, it saved my life.
Yeah.
And so when I get you talk about how you started this poem as a rant against plastic, and I find myself in that place frequently. But
Mhm.
I guess I try to, um, I don't know, I guess I try to forgive our society or humanity sometimes to say, people weren't trying to destroy the planet when they invented plastic. You know, they were trying to create this miraculous thing that
Hmm.
would allow us not to cut down so many trees and grow so much cotton and do all these other things that felt like the limits of the natural world.
Well, kill
And
so many whales, right? I mean, baleen was our
yeah,
pre-plastic
yeah,
material. Hmm.
exactly. So, I I try to remind myself of that. And you could talk about syringes in kind of a life-saving positive way, but you can also talk about them as shared syringes, which,
Hmm.
immediately brings to mind, of course, heroin epidemic and things
Hmm.
like that have just taken so many lives. So
Hmm.
I don't know how, when you were in the midst of the journey for this poem, how are you weighing those things of the rant versus kind of checking yourself about nostalgia or other things?
I think what I love about poems is the ability to hold contradiction, and
Mhm.
you said, check yourself, and I do try and check myself. I try and think in poems, how am I culpable in this moment? I'm not removed from it, and so I wanted those layers of complexity to be in the poem, and I think, it's funny. I wrote this poem, the first draft of it, before the pandemic. Um, I think the first draft was in 2017. And of course, during the pandemic, I've thought only more and more and more about plastic and the way that we've turned toward disposables in order to, prevent contagion and contamination and the
Right.
spreading of disease through our face masks or even to go containers. But I think what angers me about plastic in our lives is how thoughtlessly it can enter, right? And I think I wanted a poem that used a little bit of humor to possibly suggest that we can think twice about some of these things, right? Especially a yo-yo. Um, there are still wooden yo-yos out there, right? Um, there are glasses that we can use instead of plastic cups. We can, all of these things that we can do, and it's not convenient. And so we don't. And so I thought, if I could just play a little and be a little funny and a little snarky, but also kind of acknowledge these darknesses, that might be a way to just shine a little light.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and what I was saying before about, being understanding of how we didn't really know how bad plastic was when it was invented. But the other side of that coin is, but now we
But now
do,
we do.
and we're still not doing anything about it.
Right.
And that's where the real culpability starts to come
Yeah.
in of what are you doing about
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Are you going to buy another fleece? Is that recycled wood porch really a good thing? The recycled quote unquote wood. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's got that word recycled in
Mhm.
it, so it's got to be
Oh,
good.
absolutely. Everything recycled is perfect.
Well, let me reread another stanza. So this is in the middle. Not that long ago, maybe a decade, I made purses for my sisters out of putty-colored, red-lettered plastic Safeway bags. I'd snag a stack each time I went, then fold and sew, quilt with bright thread, line with thrift store blouses. They were sturdy and beautiful, rainproof and light, clever, so clever. I regret them. So there again, that last line is so cutting. I regret them. You set us up to see your kind of crafty, upcycled purses as, practical, durable,
Mhm.
ecologically responsible. But then you regret them. So I have questions about that. So I see the complicated relationship we have to plastic in this section of the poem. It's incredibly durable and malleable and useful, and in some ways, it can allow us to reduce our use of other resources. But there's this dark underside, again, like we were talking about before, to this durability and persistence in the environment specifically. So maybe you regret stealing a bunch of Safeway bags, so you weren't actually upcycling. But I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about, what do you regret?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think, and to what you were speaking about before when you read that other stanza too, in terms of form, for folks who haven't seen this poem, there's a dropped line here, right? Clever, so clever, and then a little bit of space, and the next line, I regret them, drops down, a continuation but a break, and I wanted that break, that pause, and I wanted to allow the poem to be caught up in that kind of delight and joy of making. As I was totally broke. I wanted to make something pretty for my sisters. I felt like I was, yeah, upcycling, I suppose. I'm not sure the word existed then. It probably did.
Right.
But yeah, make something new, free from what was at hand. And I love doing things like that. And I was kind of, a little in love with myself for coming up with this awesome plan, and pulling one over on Safeway. And they were really,
Free bags. I'll take some.
I know, and they were really cute little purses. I'm not a purse kind of person. I wonder if they still have them. I have no idea. But of course, now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I regret. That I would even think of this as a gift to give, to spend all that time with that plastic, making this thing for my sisters who I love. What an idiot. I was so blind to that at the moment. I was just in love with the making, and 10 years ago we knew plastic was bad, but it wasn't I don't know, the alarm bells were not as heightened. I was living at the time in Alaska, and we hardly had recycling. We could paper recycling, no; plastic recycling, no. So even to that extra use adds another layer, right? That
Yeah.
I was living
Yeah.
in a place where even ostensibly there was no recycling happening.
Mm. So, you can pay a lot of money right now to buy a fleece that's made from recycled plastic bags. And that is marketed as better than creating new plastic.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do the math about, what the waste is on one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems on the surface like, yeah, that's better if you're going to have a fleece jacket.
No,
That's better.
no,
Not at all.
no,
You don't even think the
no,
recycled fleece is better.
no, because okay, wear wool, but also those fleeces, when you wash them, the microfibers come out and they go
Mm,
out through your gray water, and they go through. If you're on a septic system, they just go right in. If you're on a sewer system, even they escape out and they go out into the ocean. So, I mean, I work as a marine educator, and I work, I help out with some field work with some whales, and I work on the local whale watch boats here as a naturalist. And I always tell people, like, one thing you can do to help save whales is do less laundry. All of the
mm.
stuff that we wash, it all goes out. And so, no, the recycled bottle into a fleece is, I believe, not good.
Okay, so the better thing is to take that plastic and contain it and never let it release into a water source again,
I think so.
and find completely different alternative natural fibers to use.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't need plastic bottles. We don't
Right.
need plastic trash liners.
No.
I still use a paper liner in my kitchen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't use shampoo. I use bar soap. I mean, now we're getting into this, like, what do you do, Ms. Bradfield, to reduce your plastic footprint? Because there's plenty of plastic in my life. I mean,
Right.
here I am on a computer.
Yeah.
My headphones that are plastic are plugged into my ears. I'm not a purist in that way, but I do try and think, is there an alternative?
Well, it's interesting too because things like upcycling, that's such a hip thing right now. And if you look at a lot of the eco fashion kind of world, that is kind of all the rage. It's not just about the source of the materials. It's about the end destination of the materials.
Yeah,
Let's jump to the last stanza.
sure.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, what pearl forms around a grain of plastic in an oyster? Is it as beautiful? Would you wear it? Would you buy it for your daughter so she in turn could pass it down and pass it down and pass it down? So you end the poem by expanding these questions of our relationship to plastic to questions of time and value and beauty. And finally, you end with the question of what, specifically with the question of what would you pass down to your daughter?
Right.
And thinking on that generational level, we pass down family heirlooms or wealth or knowledge or traditions, but we can also pass down ecological devastation, social pathologies, inequalities, a planet polluted by so much plastic junk, and maybe junk disguised as a pearl that appears to hold meaning, importance, value, and beauty, but really it's rotten or toxic or plastic at its core. So what's going on here at the end for you?
I mean, I think for me, that ending is very ironic because we are passing this down, right? We are passing this down to the generations that follow us. And would that pearl be as beautiful? Probably, if you didn't know what was inside of it. How important is it for us to drill down and really examine what we're holding and what's inside of it? And to really question what's at the heart of what we're carrying. To me, that's a really, really important question.
Right. So how does this poem fit into the broader context of your work and your life? And are there any other kind of stories around this poem specifically that you think are interesting?
Well, I kind of consider this poem as a subgenre of nature poetry, which I call the cranky naturalist poem, that I find myself writing quite a bit of. I think there's a lot of poems in, especially my book Once Removed, that fall into the cranky naturalist genre. And I think I write them because I do get cranky, but also I think they're a little bit funny, and things are so bad that I have to laugh. You know what I mean? If I have to laugh, I hope someone else
Right,
has to laugh
right.
too. Because if we're not laughing, then we're turning away. And laughter is a way of engaging. It's
Yeah,
a way of opening.
exactly.
So I like putting on that posture of the cranky naturalist. And yeah, I do. I work as a naturalist. I work mostly with marine mammals, with marine ecology, and so I divide my life between books and boats, basically. And both of those things really feed me. And I think a lot about the world that a seal or a whale is swimming through. And the urban ocean that most of us know, most of us who live on the coasts, whether you're on the East Coast, I live on Cape Cod, or the West Coast, or uh, the UK, South Africa, Australia, wherever. All of these coasts are very urban coasts, and the ocean has been thought of as for so long as something that's, quote unquote, too big to fail. But we're seeing some failures, and it's really concerning to me. So I think a lot about the ocean, which I love so much, that I find inspiration and solace in, and has a very complicated human history, also a really complicated ecological history that we hardly even understand. I mean, we don't even know how long really humpback whales live. There are so many mysteries out there, and we're changing the ocean pretty rapidly. So a lot of my time and thought goes into thinking about ocean ecology, marine ecology.
Yeah, and in reality, the oceans are too big to ignore, which is
Yeah.
exactly what we do.
Yeah.
Human history is a history of dumping our waste into a water source, whether
Yeah.
that's a river or an ocean or some other place where it seems to our eyes to disappear.
Yeah. And in honesty, we're all downstream.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, some people more immediately than others.
There's no stream on a sphere.
That's right. Yeah. So in terms of my writing, I write a lot about, there's a little ocean in here, not a ton, but I write a lot about the fulcrum between our social selves and our animal selves, or the other more than human beings that are out there in the world. And I find that a really interesting, sometimes funny, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes inspiring, um, and complicated set of dynamics.
And if you're going to start a podcast eventually, you're going to have to call it The Cranky Naturalist.
My friend Melissa and I, she's a naturalist also, but we had a joke that we should start a podcast called Wait, Don't Touch That, about all the things that you shouldn't be doing, that the naturalist would tisk you for doing. Number one would be those recycled fleece sweatshirts.
Wow. Well, I don't buy the recycled fleece sweatshirts, but I've at least given them the benefit of the doubt that it's better than the alternative. But you're right. You're totally right. So right now there's so much activism going on around our use of plastic and the ridiculous ubiquity of plastic pollution, single-use plastic, wasteful packaging, microplastics in the bodies of fish and every other living thing in the ocean. How do you see poetry or other forms of art in relationship to the activist project of understanding and bringing attention to huge problems like plastic pollution?
I think what I love about poetry, in addition to so many other things, that it's really a form that asks us to occupy both the mind and the heart, right? The intellect and the emotion. And that's what we need to do to move forward and make any kind of progress. Thinking isn't enough. We also have to feel and to help people connect and care. And so I think if we can write things that keep these conversations alive, and stop us from just numbing over to the things we know. Like, we know plastic is bad, but I was at this show the other day at the Center for Coastal Studies, which is a research and education nonprofit on Cape Cod in Provincetown. And there was they had an art show that had a lot of marine debris inspired work in it. And one of the images that was so striking to me, I can't remember the name of the artist, but it was a photographer, and she had collected, tennis balls on the beach, which you find so many of. And she set them up in this grid and photographed them in this sterile, pristine way. And they were so beautiful and so strange, and made me look at them differently and think about them differently. And I think that is what I think art and poetry can do, to just wake us up and make us consider, slow down a little bit of time, hold a little bit of space, and allow us to feel and not just be numbed out by all this information.
Right. Yeah, and ice core data and carbon dioxide level changes over the last couple decades, that stuff's really important, but it doesn't make you feel in a direct way. I mean, maybe it has an indirect way of making you feel if you have enough background knowledge about what it means and you can translate it in your own head. But also, I think besides the feeling is kind of there's a pragmatic side to art too. You have a poetry reading and you invite people and they come. And it's fun, and you get to hang out with people. You're not gonna read your ice core data to a group of people in a room unless you're at
a scientific conference,
a glaciology conference. So I mean, for me, it also just on this very pragmatic level, it just allows us to keep the conversation going in forms that people are more comfortable with, or more excited about, are kind of a positive, beautiful, kind of beneficial side of their experience, rather than something that seems dull and grueling and opaque.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the energy of a rant or a cranky naturalist poem, for me, can be a lot of fun and can be a way to vent frustration and rage that is really necessary, and then hopefully move on, pick up and move on, right? I think we look for art not just to help us explore the more difficult realities of our world, but also find energy, solace, inspiration to move on, maybe do something a little bit differently to not just sink into despair.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really important to me, that poems are part of our greater public discourse. And I think, what you're doing with your podcast is doing that. Our conversation is about that also. And, it's not an elite, isolated form, right? Poems want to connect, and they can. And I welcome every little moment where I see that happening in the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I have Irish heritage, although I've never
The
been
bard.
although I've never been to Ireland, and I'm completely disconnected from the culture and place in a direct way. But I've heard that to this day, poets are like huge celebrities in Ireland. Like every town has their poet laureate, essentially, and it's such a big deal culturally. And then I think about America and how all of our superstars are, from Hollywood or or like sports or business moguls. And sometimes I ask myself, how would our society be different if the poets were the superstars here?
I don't know. I think in some circles they are. I was lucky enough to be able to study with the poet Evan Boland, who's Irish, when I was at Stanford, and I'll never forget her telling us a story of Aer Lingus, the airline for Ireland. They were redesigning their interior cabin, and they I don't know, this kind of cracks me up, but they took one of her poems and wove it into the seat embroidery. And so I just think about all of those people sitting on Evan Boland's words. And it's kind of gross and kind of like farting into it and all the things that you do on an airplane. But it's also kind of amazing and wonderful that they would want poetry as part of this journey into the sky too, Yeah. So I wonder the same thing.
Great. Well, can you end by reading the poem once again?
I'd be happy to. Plastic, a personal history. How can I find a way to praise it? Did the early inventors and embracers churn with regret? I don't think my parents, born in the swing toward ubiquity, chew and chew and chew on plastic. But of course they do. Bits in water, food, flesh, air. And their parents? I remember Dad mocking his mother's drawer of saved rubber bands and his father-in-law's red, corroded jerry can, patched and patched, never replaced for new, for never rusting. Cash or plastic? Plastic, even for gum. We hate the $5 minimum. Bills paperless, automatic, almost unreal. My toys were plastic, castle and circus train and yo-yo. Did my lunches ever get wrapped in waxed paper, or was it all saran, saran, saran? Sarah's mom was given, in Girl Scouts, a blue sheet of plastic to cut, sew, and trim with white piping into pouches for camping. Sarah has it still, brittle but useful. Merit badge for waterproofing, for everlasting. You, too, must have heard stories, now quaint as carriages, of first plastic, pre-plastic, eras of glass, waxed cloth, and tin, of shared syringes. All our grocery bags, growing up, were paper, bottom hefted on forearm, top crunched into grab. We used them to line the kitchen garbage pail. Not that long ago, maybe a decade, I made purses for my sisters out of putty-colored, red-lettered plastic Safeway bags. I'd snag a stack each time I went, then fold and sew, quilt with bright thread, line with thrift store blouses. They were sturdy and beautiful, rainproof and light, clever, so clever. I regret them. And the plastic toothpicks, folders, shoes that seemed so cheap, so easy, so use again, and thus less wasteful than. What did we do before to-go lids? Things must have just spilled and spilled. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what pearl forms around a grain of plastic in an oyster? Is it as beautiful? Would you wear it? Would you buy it for your daughter so she in turn could pass it down and pass it down and pass it down?
Beautiful. Liz, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been great.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciated this conversation and really enjoyed it, John.
Thank you so much to Elizabeth Bradfield. Go to our website at chrysalispodcast.org, where you can read her poem, Plastic, A Personal History, see some photographs of her at work as a naturalist and marine educator, and find our book and media recommendations. This episode was researched and edited by Brody Muchler, with additional editing by Sophia Chang. Music is by Danielle Rodriguez Vivas. Mixing is by Morgan Honecker. If you enjoyed my conversation with Elizabeth, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Contact me anytime at chrysalispodcast.org, where you can also support the project, subscribe to our newsletter, and join the conversation.